Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope you're all having a good day. So on Tuesdays, what I like to do is the community deck techs. And this week we had 9 submissions. And so I knew eventually the day would come where I'd have too many submissions for me to actually cover everything. So what I'm doing, what I plan to do if we continue to have that many submissions is select 4 of the 9 or whatever randomly. So I just did a random number generator, gave you guys all numbers, and so I have to apologize to Jicado, Snake Druid, Alex Junge, Boston Acheron, and Jate. Thank you for your submissions. I hope the community still got, you can always look at them in the community tab and see what other people have brought to the table. Always feel free to comment on other people's decks too, and just give them ideas. The whole idea is to generate discussion about Magic the Gathering, right? So, because one of the things that I really dislike about Magic the Gathering is when conversations can't remain civil and people are like, this is the way that it has to be, right? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to just kind of, I'll give you some of my ideas. I don't think that they're necessarily better than the submission that you brought, right? So we'll start things off here with Jund Surprise by Dormian6478. And so this list, I've seen versions of like Gruul Surprise quite a bit. You're leaning off of the Smuggler's Surprise as the key, right? So you've got big threats that you can then play at instant speed with the help of Smuggler's Surprise. So while I was looking at this and kind of seeing what changes Bloomburrow has brought to the table in this archetype, I did bump into a Jund Surprise deck by Muroki Satoshi, who took down a top 4 in a store championship in Japan on September 1st. And I thought that it was bringing some interesting ideas to the table. So this one coming in as a best of 3 list here with a fully kitted sideboard already. So I won't be able to actually pull up the cards that I'm going to talk about, so hopefully you know what they are already. So Preacher of the Schism and Vein Ripper, like Vein Ripper just being kind of another top-end threat that you can get out cheaply. The list was running the Calamity, the Spinewinds Armadillo, and the Vaultborn Tyrant, so just leaning a little bit more heavily into the top end, and then not running the Outcaster Trailblazer and the Soul of Windgrace, and not running the Railway Brawler. And this just being kind of a weaker card against some of the aggro decks, so like Rakdos Lizards, maybe Gruul aggro, mono red aggro, where the 4/2 body is just not particularly great to have, right? So ditching those 3 to run Preacher of the Schism, which kind of with that 2/4 body really helps with the more aggressive matchups, and the Vein Ripper then also giving you some of that life when your creatures are getting sacrificed. So just an alternative option. And what they also did was run the Malicious Eclipse, not in the main, but in the sideboard. And I see that you've got Brotherhood's End in the main as well as in the sideboard. And so what they've done is they're just running the Calamity Galloping Inferno as the only red card. And what that allows you to do is get rid of all of these commercial districts, the Carplusian Forests, and just rely off of casting the Calamity off of the Smuggler's Surprise, because really you want to hold on to playing the Calamity until you can set up a 1-turn kill, right? And because when this comes into play, if you're not familiar with it, you can then saddle something to create a duplicate copy of it. And so you can come in for a ton of damage out of nowhere with this list. And that also allows you to have more early black if you're not trying to have as many red sources. Which then opens up the possibility of playing cards like Cut Down, alternative black removal, while still having the sweeper that you can bring in on the sideboard of Malicious Eclipse. So kind of like that personally. And the other one too was Pillage the Bog, to be able to kind of almost play like a 5th copy of the Smuggler's Surprise, right? Be able to get some really good dig off of the ramp that you're getting from the Heaped Harvest, to then search your deck and find your Smuggler's Surprise to do the 1-turn kill. Virtue of Persistence was also in that list, though. So like you have a lot of similarities to that list. It's just a slight little tweak. And Virtue of Persistence allows you to do that removal while also giving you some late game. And this deck eventually does go over the top. The one that was in Japan was also running Deadly Cover Up. So again, just a couple of tweaks. I don't think they were running the Feed the Cycle. I'd have to go back and look at it, but you can Google it and find it. Hopefully, just look for the store championship in Japan on September 1st, and look for the top 4. That being said, yeah, if you remove the red, you can dramatically change the lands. You could play some Cavern of Souls to then help protect some of your key earlier cards if you are coming up against counterspells and such. And then the best of 3 sideboard. Notably, there were a couple of tools that I think that I kind of want to see come in here somehow. So like Duress is really good because this deck does struggle against the counter spells stopping your 1-turn combo off of the Smuggler's Surprise, right? So Duress is a way to kind of clear that, make sure that they don't have that in their hand before you go for the 1-turn kill. I think there's a fair amount of artifact and enchantment hate that I probably want to try to get Terra Sunder in on the sideboard. And also potentially cut down if you feel like the deck is struggling against the aggro decks, which I haven't played this archetype for a little bit, I must admit. Last time I played it, it was more like more in red-green than in black-green. But while you're ramping, I think any ramp deck is a little bit prone to getting overrun early. So the cut downs could be a nice option to have in the best of 3 sideboard. Another one that I've seen in like the Japan list was running the Harvester of Misery, and I think that one kind of gives you an additional thing that you could bring in. So you've got like the 3 copies of the Brotherhood's End. I'd be running the Malicious Eclipse, and then I would also think about bringing in the Harvester of Misery to increase the amount of stuff that we have that answers Rakdos Lizards, especially if your experiences on the ladder are similar to the spike in Rakdos Lizards that we've seen in the best of 3 tournaments on Moto. So if I was going to run it in that tournament, then I definitely would want some more answers for the Rakdos Lizards specifically, and I think Harvester of Misery looks pretty good for that. Aclazot's Deepest Betrayal is another one too that you could explore as an alternative. I do see you have like the Tyrannix Rex here, which can't be countered. So this is kind of like the strategy if you are up against something that's planning to counterspell your 1-turn kill. And Aclazot's Deepest Betrayal is good against just different matchups, right? Like Dimir midrange, anything that you need a little bit more life gain and stabilization, because we haven't been seeing a whole bunch of spells being, a whole bunch of counter spells being played in the meta. So this one's more of a meta specific suggestion. If you're, you've definitely put some work into this, so this is all with a grain of salt, right? The other question that I have for you, because like Obstinate Baloth is great if you're coming up against Golgari midrange. You can punish the Shieldred. Punish the Golgari midrange and Liliana. Sorry, I read the Shieldred card. Shieldred the Apocalypse gives you a nice kind of buffer like Aclazot's Deepest Betrayal. So this is kind of like you could take out maybe one Shieldred and play the Aclazot's and just see if you like it in certain matchups. Because there isn't a whole lot of card draw in this deck to synergize with it. There is a little bit, but not like a ton. And then last but not least, you've got 2 copies of the Tyrannix Rex. So, Harvester of Misery would be my pick, but again, meta-specific. Season of Gathering, I'm not really sure what matchup you would be bringing this in. I guess it would be sort of like bringing in Nissa without the ability to have the, like, recurring disenchant, where you can kind of give an overrun effect and give all of your creatures that +1/+1 trample if they have, like, a bunch of stuff that can protect your things from just trampling over, because you do have the trample off of the Vaultborn Tyrant, and off of the Railway Brawler, but you are missing it on some pieces, right? So an alternative to Season of Gathering would be Nissa. I haven't had a lot of experience with this card yet. It does give you the artifact or enchantment hate. It just happens once, so I feel like it's a very similar slot to what you would see with Nissa. So. And you got the Tranquil Frillback for against mono red or against the aggro, gives you the artifact enchantment hate. Like, I really like the deck, and the end giving you an answer to strategies that have one specific card that you're looking to attack. So Thank you for submission, Dormian. I hope my comments find you well. The second one that I chose randomly was Orzhov Discard by Percy, 55. And this one, I had a couple of brews going on for Orzhov Bats and then like Orzhov Discard. And this one, so there was the meta breaker, or not there was the best of 1, best of 3 meta review that I did yesterday, where we were talking about Cabeza de la Bolo's take on the Orzhov Discard Pixie list. So if you didn't see the meta review, I'd at least go look at that deck specifically, because I think it would give you some ideas. The other one, too, that I haven't covered that I think applies to this deck is Orzhov Discard by Sapoa, who took down a first place on a standard challenge, or standard league, not standard challenge, on August 13th. So it was a little bit while ago. But some ideas to consider, right? One of which is the Lauren of the Third Path. So in best of 1, you might not be coming up against as much artifact or enchantment as sometimes you would in best of 3. I assume without there being a sideboard here that this was probably designed for best of 1. Lauren of the Third Path, personally, I've come up against enough of the Caretaker's talent control that I think Lauren of the Third Path would be a nice one to have just as a one-of, similar to what we saw with Cabeza de la Bolo. And the Aclazot's Deepest Betrayal, you said really like tied the deck together and kind of helped you with some matchups. So that, that seems like a great inclusion. I think a lot of the Orzhov Discard decks that I've seen don't include it because of leaning into the ETBs, and Aclazot's doesn't have the ETB, right? So like bringing in a Guardian of Gearpor that allows you to bounce all of your stuff that you want to get the enter the battlefield effect on again. Tiny Bones Joins Up, too, is one that Sapoa was running that allows you to kind of have synergies with the Braids and the Zora line, and also fits into kind of like having a 5th copy of the Hopeless Nightmare, so could explore that one. And the Ruthless Lawbringer is another one that you can kind of bounce and then sacrifice one of your creatures to destroy a non-land permanent, allows you to get kind of a little bit more of that artifact and enchantment hate, also a little bit of Planeswalker hate. And Beza, the Bounding Spring, right? So this one is deciding to run the Rottenmouth Viper. The one by Sapoa was also running the Rottenmouth Viper, just an alternative with Cabeza de la Bolo went for Beza. It's going to be matchup dependent how much aggro you're experiencing, because this is better in the mid-range situation than it is in aggro, where Beza can help stabilize you. Carrot Cake is also another one that's kind of being explored in this one, in this archetype, that gives you another target to bounce with your Nurturing Pixie, your Tithing Blade. If you don't go with the Guardian of Gearpor and really lean heavily into the bounce, then you probably are fine with just keeping the Aclazots to give you that life stabilization and not needing the Carrot Cake. But the Carrot Cake gives you so much value with Braids that I think it's an interesting inclusion. And then similarly, the Lively Dirge, I think, fits well into this archetype, being able to go get those Carrot Cakes and Tithing Blades and such from, like tutor them specifically. So Cabeza de la Bola was running one of those. And I should have been pointing them out over here. My bad. So there's Lively Dirge, if you don't know what I'm talking about. Carrot Cake is the artifact that creates the 1/1. Tiny Bones Joins Up is the one that has the legendary synergies that makes you discard. Lauren of the Third Path to give you the artifact and enchantment hate. Ruthless Lawbringer has the ETB, sacrifice, destroyed non-land permanent, and then Beza has the life gain. So sorry about that. I missed talking through them in the sideboard. All right, next up on the list is a take on Orzhov Vampires by David Ramirez, 8795. And this one was given to me without any lands, because they wanted to see what I would do with the lands, and is kind of leaning into this life gain synergy and vampires, right? So we have the Ichor Drinker, we have the Blood Seeker, we've got the Lunar Convocation in here. I think that if you are going to run this one, then you definitely want to bring in the Painland of Caves of Kolios to be able to have a way to trigger the life lost, so that you can gain life and lose life and get those 1/1 bat tokens. The other thing too is, when it comes to designing a deck, you really want to think about, like, am I aggro? Am I mid-range? Am I control? or am I some sort of tempo or combo deck, right? And personally, I think this just has way too many threes for me to call this one an aggro deck, and not enough life synergies to beat out the Orzhov bats, right? Because like really, I think that if you're going to lean fully into the Orzhov or into the vampire synergies, I'm happy to see that you do have Markov Baron in here, and I do think that there's a couple of vampires, especially in the earlier slots, that you're not running that I think would help improve the pace of the deck. One is Amalia. It fits in with the life gain synergies off of your Ichor Drinker and your Bloodseeker. And then Bartolome, a little bit less important, but it pairs nicely with Vein Ripper, which are all also vampires. We've got the Vran, which can also do the ping your opponent for 2 damage, gain 2 life, which then can grow some of your other, like your Amalia and whatnot. Works for even stacking further into the sacrificing your own stuff, which you would probably want to bring in a couple more like little 1-drops that are decent sack fodder if you went down that road. The other thing too is that you want to think about what decks in the meta are going to counter this strategy. And so I think that especially with this many 3-drops, you're really setting yourself up to not be able to pressure them fast enough to beat the Sunfall on turn 5. And so you could bring in like Deep Cavern Bat is a great way to hate on your opponent's hand and try to get rid of the Wraths. You could also maybe play around with Duress, although with like Celestia Rabbits and Boros Convoke, there are some matchups in best of 1 that is not going to be great for Duress. And then Shieldred's Edict, I think, is an option that comes into a lot of decks just as like a 1 or 2 of, to give you a little bit of Planeswalker hate. Some people like the Bitter Triumph instead of the Shieldred's Edict. I like the Shieldred's Edict unless you're doing graveyard synergies off of the discard. So there's some ideas for you. And there's the Bitter Triumph that I was talking about. Alternatively, you can try to take this into more of a controlling space, and one of the tools that's really nice, especially in best of 3, I'm not so sure about running it in best of 1, but in best of 3, Pest Control is a really nice one to bring in against the decks that have a whole bunch of tokens and 1-drops. So not necessarily that this build should be bringing these in, but then you've got some kind of like lower class vampires. Like this is not a particularly good vampire in constructed. It was okay in limited, but it's not particularly great. It does have the lifelink, and I get that like it kind of fits the theme, but a 2/1 body is just really fragile, right? I mean, it dies to like the 1 damage to the board kind of thing, right? And doesn't really work very well on defense. So I kind of want to, like I mentioned, just try to shift these cards further over to the left. So now the other thing was lands. So looking at like Bloodletter of Aclazotz here, this one needs 21 sources of black to be able to play it on turn 4 90% of the time. And so this build does have 21 sources of black, and so it is just barely getting there. Personally, I don't think this deck is particularly good for the Bloodletter of Aclazotz, unless we're going to maybe bring in some stuff that is going to give us more of that like direct damage. Just because the triple pip black is particularly hard to cast, and I'm not super impressed by Drana and Linvala outside of it being like maybe a commander card. I haven't really seen this one a whole lot to be like the expensive mana cost is kind of difficult, right? But I do love the Sanguine Evangelist. I love the Baron if you are doing the Vampire Tribal thing, Preacher of the Schism too, and the Ruthless Lawbringer. I just want a little bit more of that fodder, because you do get fodder off of the Preacher of the Schism, but it's just so slow if it makes it prone to the Sunfall strategy, right? But you do have the answers for the mono red, right? You've got the cut downs and the go for the throats. Pest Control would let you kind of have a better answer against Boros Convoke. Celestia Rabbits a little bit, but maybe still struggling on that matchup outside of having more of a specific Wrath. And I think with a couple of tweaks though, that you could have a relatively good vampire deck, right? And the Lunar Convocation, I'm not sure I like it enough to be because like what I want to do is put in more 2-drops and pull out this, because this is like more of a mid-range or control card than aggro. And I think there's actually a fair amount of damage in here that we could be pushing pretty quickly. And the reason why I want to favor aggro is where lifelink is really nice in the aggro matchup, where if you're taking turns attacking each other and one person has lifelink, you can't race it, right? You're gaining too much life for them to deal enough damage to you. And so that kind of makes me want to go in that route. But it's certainly not the only way that you could take it. The other thing too is we lost the slow lands for Orzhov, so Fabled Passage, but we don't want too many of them because we don't want to ruin our earlier plays. And Cavern of Souls would allow us to name Vampire and give us mana fixing while also preventing things from getting counterspelled. And then Restless Fortress, I think if you're going to be an Orzhov, you might as well play the man land. If you have a whole ton of 1s and 2-drops, then you don't really want to play the tap lands. So I hope that gives you some ideas of where to take the Orzhov Vampires deck. And thank you for your submission. And the fourth deck that I had to choose between. Zigzag brought in, did 2 submissions. Don't worry, it did not increase their chances of being picked. I just gave them 1 lottery ticket. But they submitted 2 decks, and the first one that they submitted was the Orzhov Control list. And I really wanted, I was like, well, we're talking about Orzhov this week anyway, so let's do a third Orzhov list. But the first thing that I'd like to talk about, and this is definitely one that is a little bit more towards just my opinion than facts, right? I can see pros and cons either way. I don't think that you should be running 61 cards unless it's part of the strategy, right? Like if you're making it consistently through your deck and you're worried about losing to mill, then maybe there's an argument for bringing in a 61st card. Now, Zigzag said it was a preference based off of their experiences with the best of 1 hand smoother, and I've looked at a fair amount of data for hand smoothing, and with 25 lands and 26 lands, and like when you're not doing the aggro cheese it thing, the hand smoother doesn't affect it as much, right? It really affects lands 1, 2, and 3. Because that's what the hand smoother is looking for in your starting hand, and then turns 4 and 5 are less dependent on the hand smoother and more dependent on the amount of lands that you're running in your deck, right? Which is why like you can't just across the board drop lands in best of 1 because of the hand smoother. If you care about the later end of your curve, like Control in best of 1 still plays 26, 27, sometimes even 28, right? And so I don't know. I don't buy that it's better as 61. I guess it would lower the chances of having 2 lands in your starting hand or 3 lands in your starting hand by like a couple, maybe like a percentage. So it's pretty minuscule anyway, right? But I thought I'd just talk about it because like I see people do 61 cards, and technically, if you're trying to make the best deck possible, you should probably get rid of that 1 card, because unless you're getting through the entirety of your deck, you're just letting Shuffler choose 1 card that's not going to show up, right? That could have been a card that you did want. And you were saying that you would just like pull the Malicious Eclipse out in best of 3. I would probably just do that in best of 1 as well. Again, personal preference thing. Okay, next up, we have 18 sources of white, and we have 19 sources of black, because I do not count Mirix as a colored source, because it only gives it to you for that 1 turn. And with that, you're kind of short on the Bloodletter of Acklezotz. If you count this as black, then I guess you're at the 21, and Bloodletter's okay. Honestly, I don't think it fits the theme particularly well in the first place. I'm not incredibly impressed by this Bloodletter. This works better in board flood strategies and aggro strategies where you're like, or in a combo strategy where you're trying to do the Rush of Dread. I think in this deck, it just feels out of place to me. The other thing too is I don't really like the Malicious Eclipse and the Temporary Lockdown, because it's a 1 double pip black and then a 1 double pip white that puts a lot of tension on the sources that you need to have, which is 18. So you do have both, you have it covered technically. Like you get the bare minimum for these. But I would rather just see a 4th copy of Temporary Lockdown, or actually, since you're running all of these 2-drop black removal cards, and which you would like to have on turn 2, I would actually lean more towards running a full playset of the Malicious Eclipse instead of the Temporary Lockdown. So I would run, if you're going to run 3, I'd run 3 or 4 and just cut the Temporary Lockdowns personally. That I think would help, maybe. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was like card draw, right? Because if like, you've got the Orzhov Discard strategy, this list is not running the Caretaker's Talent. And I think Caretaker's Talent allows Control to get an incredible amount of value. And you're going for the Union of the Third Path and the Stargaze, which is still going to help you, right? Like that's still going to help you counteract the discard strategy, which we're not even seeing as much anymore. But I play around with trying to get Caretaker's Talent in. Just because it does pair well with some of your token stuff. There's a lot of different builds out there. I know some go like the Virtue of Loyalty in white and go more towards like that as a win condition, and you're going more for the Virtue of Persistence. Let's bring back Phyrexian Flesh Gorgers, because they also help stabilize against the early pressure of mono red. So it may not be great for this build. Chimmel the Inner Sun also, like as a one of, I get where you're going with it. It just has some of these like awkward RNG. There are decks where I don't like Chimmel, and I think this is one of them because of hitting into a Wrath when you don't want to hit into a Wrath, and like I don't know, the Discover 5 mechanic. I'd rather just have this be a Wrath, honestly. And like it allows you to not be countered, which I get, like, because I think the weakness of this deck is coming up against a like classic white-blue control, which we haven't seen very much on the ladder. So in the meta, I think this deck is really well positioned. You've got the Harvester of Misery in here to wipe the Rakdos lizards and maybe even the bunnies, temporary lockdown, and you do have the Starfall Invocation, right? So you've definitely got a lot of board-centric things that that's partly what would make you weaker against Azorius Control that doesn't care if you have all of these Wraths, right? But so Chimmel, question mark, Bloodletter, question mark, preference for the Malicious Eclipse instead of the Temporary Lockdown. And then there's a couple of other question marks where, like, what do we bring in instead of the Chimmel? You could lean even more heavily into another Wrath. I don't think the deck needs it. I didn't mean to put 2 in here. Season of the Burrow, I think, is one that I've seen being explored that works better with the Caretaker's Talent, giving you the card draw as well, but being able to destroy 2 things on your opponent's board and just have them draw a card. Like, Control doesn't care necessarily if they've gotten them completely shut down. You just might need to be able to have that, like, these 2 things need to go. And then also being able to return a permanent for 3. There's some interesting synergies that you could explore with Season of the Burrow. Hostile Investigator, I think, helps if you do experience more of that, like, Azorius Control. I would probably lean a little bit more into maybe some of the hand hate, like Liliana the Veil and Hostile Investigator, just as counters. I don't think I'd start them in the main until we start to see Azorius Control more on the ladder. And yeah, so that's it. Thanks for your submissions, and I hope my comments find you well. And take care, everybody. At the same time as this video is, I'm a little bit behind schedule today, so the community tab for week 6 is already available. So if you'd like to submit your decks there, feel free. And if you are interested in these sort of deck techs and are sad that I didn't choose one of you, you can always become a YouTube member, right? So YouTube members get free deck techs, and I will be happy to review and nerd out about Magic to your heart's content, right? So possible option if that seems appealing to you. So with that, though, take care, everybody. Tomorrow my Arena Open Day 2 video will be up, and then some draft videos, and I'll try to get to the gameplay video before Saturday, or at least by Saturday, and then see you on Sunday for the Meta Breakers. Take care.